Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. With major conferences on Yemen and Afghanistan this week, London has welcomed some of the world's most powerful and influential politicians, and we'll be meeting some of them in the course of the next hour. Later in the programme, NATO's spokesman on Afghanistan, the foreign ministers of Yemen and Pakistan and Jordan, plus that great comic genius Billy Connolly. But first, Zimbabwe. Nearly a year ago, Morgan Tsvangirai was sworn in as Prime Minister of Zimbabwe in a new and hopeful unity government with President Robert Mugabe. However, power sharing has been far from straightforward, and outstanding issues really do remain. This week, Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF warned that no more concessions will be made to Morgan Tsvangirai's movement for democratic change until all sanctions are lifted against them. So what now for the unity government? Joining me now from Davos is Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai. Mr. Prime Minister, on the 11th of February, you'll have been Prime Minister for a year. Have you progressed in that time as much as you hoped?
I think I can confirm that we have made progress over the last year, and I think it's a positive development for the country. I think that one can identify the economic side of the response to the people's plight, that we were almost down, that the economy had almost literally collapsed, that by the end of the year, people have confirmed that for the first time in 10 years they had a good Christmas. So we might question that progress.
Well, we now have a situation where both Robert Mugabe and Arthur Mutambara have called for an end to sanctions against Zimbabwe. Should they be lifted?
Well, the issue of sanctions is neither a ZANU-PF or a Mutambara issue or a Tsvangirai issue. It is a collective issue against the country. And as far as we are concerned, we should speak with one voice on this issue. The only limitation is that there is no reservation about us calling for lifting of sanctions, provided the global political agreement is implemented in full. And we're hoping that by the end of last year, these issues will be resolved and that we will all be speaking with one voice on this issue. It is part of the global political agreement.
But Mr. Mugabe said that his party will make no concessions to yours until sanctions are lifted. What will that mean for the country?
Well, I'm sure that those preconditions are totally unnecessary. As far as we are concerned, an agreement has been entered into by all parties voluntarily, and that sanctions and any restrictive measure against the country is part of the collective effort to remove any restrictions against the country. And so it's not necessary at this stage to backtrack on the agreement. What he should be talking about is that we want to fulfill all the conditions that have been agreed in the global political agreement for the country to move forward. So this backtracking is unfortunate. We hope that it doesn't become an albatross to the agreement.
I read that the South African President, Jacob Zuma, has said that you're the one who's blocking the progress of talks. But you would say you're not.
Well, I'm not. An agreement was signed by all parties last year. All we are talking about, even the Troika in SADC meeting in January, talked about implementation framework and timelines. That's all we are asking for. Let's implement what we have agreed. There is no intransigence. The intransigence that can be identified was resolved when we agreed in a global political agreement. The substance was negotiated then. What is now left is for every party to commit themselves to the implementation of the global political agreement. And that is not in conflict with the objective of the inclusive government.
You are in Davos, of course, at the moment, as we can see from the beautiful scene behind you. You're promoting investment in Zimbabwe. But if you won't even call for sanctions to be lifted, why should anyone invest in a country where they are at the same time holding sanctions against them?
First of all, I think I'm here to clarify the position of Zimbabwe and that there has been progress in the country and that the continued perception of a country that is in a crisis must be removed. So it's a public relations act to remove any doubt about where the country is going. It's not about attracting investment. Of course, if people are convinced that they want to invest in Zimbabwe, they should come. And at some stage, we will be calling, and of course, we will call for the removal of any restrictions that will prevent the country from moving forward.
When do you think you will be able to do that, ready to say that, Morgan?
The final meeting of the negotiators is there on the 8th and 9th. Let's see what happens. And then we can all call from the same point. But certainly at some stage, we all don't believe in sanctions. We all don't believe in any restrictions that will constrain the country from developing and moving forward.
The terrorism trial of your MDC colleague, Roy Bennett, is still going on, but it does seem that the case may be collapsing. Do you hope it'll be dropped soon?
Well, first of all, I never believed that Roy Bennett was guilty in the first place. We felt that this was a persecution of a man who was a member of the MDC and a white member of the MDC. And so to us, it has never been about his guilt. It has always been about persecution. And therefore, I think in the due process of time, that the state will realize that it has no case against him, as we have always believed.
And a year into the new government, do you think in another year's time, do you want Robert Mugabe to still be president of Zimbabwe?
Well, the agreement does not specify, the 19th Amendment does not specify how long he's going to be president. It only specifies about the duration of the agreement and then going to elections. So as far as we are concerned, there's a constitutional process going on. We will have a referendum, and then we'll decide for elections next year. Whether Robert Mugabe is there or not is immaterial. What is material is that the two parties have agreed on this process. And should he be there, it's because his party allows him to be there.
So whether or not Robert Mugabe is involved, you're definitely expecting elections next year, yeah?
Absolutely. I don't see anything that can change that program because that is part of the process of transition.
So are you today, a year on, Morgan, more or less optimistic than a year ago?
I'm cautiously optimistic about the process we have embarked on. And I must say that, the decision to have this coalition has saved the country from a precipice. And that we have managed to provide the people a basis of hope and a basis of looking forward to even more progress in the coming years.
People do say that one of the problems is ZANU-PF are still not really observing human rights, that there are still human rights violations in your country. Is that true?
Well, there could be. I mean, look, we all have budgeted for incidents of this nature, and where there is an incident of abuse, we have highlighted it and we have stopped it. I think there is no collective direction within the ZANU-PF leadership to say they should definitely be embarking on abusing people. Where incidents have occurred, we have tried to address it. And the situation is much better than it was last year.
Much better than it was last year. Well, that's an optimistic place to end. We must allow you to go and get in a bit of skiing before you leave, Morgan, but thanks again for being with us, as ever.
Thank you very much, Lord Frost. Thank you.
In a minute or two, after the brave, defiant figure there of Morgan Tsvangirai, we'll be meeting two foreign ministers from Pakistan and from Yemen after this incredibly short break. Welcome back, welcome back. This week, London hosted two major conferences. The first was on Yemen, and we'll come to that in a moment. The second was even bigger, on Afghanistan. The leaders pledged $140 million, with more to come, to buy off or reintegrate Taliban fighters. The Taliban leadership under Mullah Omar has already rejected the plan, but nobody really expected him to leap out in enthusiasm for it. Pakistan was represented at the conference by their Foreign Minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, who's with me now. Foreign Minister, welcome. Do you think it is possible, it really is possible, to divide the Taliban somewhere down the middle? Is it possible to divide who's possibly going to be peaceful and who isn't? I mean, it's a tough decision human beings are going to have to make.
I wouldn't say divide the Taliban. I think it is possible to engage with the Taliban, because there is an element in the Taliban, if given a choice, they would want an alternative. Let's not forget that they are also fatigued. They have been in this conflict for too long, and if people can get a respectable way out, they would opt for it.
And in what ways, how would you characterize the difference between the Taliban in Pakistan, which you're fighting at the moment, and the Taliban in Afghanistan? How different are they?
Well, there are linkages between the two. They come from common tribes, and they also at times have a nexus. But the Taliban of Pakistan are primarily creating disturbances for us within Pakistan. You know, the suicide bombings that are taking place in Pakistan are being carried out by the Pakistani Taliban.
And one of the reasons for this decision, could be going up to 500 million in terms of wooing the Taliban away from their current affiliations and so on. Is one reason for that really that an outright military victory on its own is sort of impossible, both in Afghanistan and Pakistan?
You see, you also have to understand the history of Afghanistan. You have to understand the geography, the terrain of Afghanistan when you talk of the military option. And how can you have a military victory without having people with you? You know, you need local support. The reason our military operations in Pakistan have been somewhat more successful as compared to operations on the other side of the border is because we were able to win the hearts and minds and carry the people along. And today, when we cleared the areas from the militants, the local population was there to hold them with us, with the military troops, as opposed to Afghanistan, where, you know, once the forces clear the areas, and when they leave, the local population is not supportive, and they do not help them hold the areas. And the result is the miscreants come back.
Right. And in fact, one of the things that seems to have come out of the last few months of crisis is that the relationship between Pakistan and the United States seems to be better, in the sense General Petraeus said we, America, was going to be a steadfast partner, and Robert Gates said, so let me say definitively that the US does not covet a single inch of Pakistani soil. We seek no military bases here, and we have no desire to control Pakistan's nuclear weapons. It sounds as though you've turned over a new page in relations with the United States.
I think the United States wants a long-term strategic relationship with Pakistan. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was in Pakistan, and I met her yesterday on the sidelines of the London conference. And we discussed the strategic dialogue, which we intend to initiate hopefully shortly. You know, once the dates are given to me, I'll be traveling to Washington for that. And we have broadened the scope of that dialogue. If you look at the engagement, if you look at the congressional delegation visiting Pakistan, if you look at the high-level visits that have taken place in the last, I would say, year or so, yes, there is an interest, I think, in the United States to engage with Pakistan and to have Pakistan on their side. And we have been traditional allies over the last 6 decades. Yes, our relationship has seen ups and downs, but by and large, we've been supportive of each other.
And some people say that people in Pakistan are somewhat worried about Hamid Karzai's closeness to India. Is that true?
Well, see, Afghanistan is an independent country, it's a sovereign country, and so is India. Right. And they have every right to engage and have relations. and we have no objections to that. But I think in the last couple of years, since the democratic government in Pakistan came into office, relations with Hamid Karzai and his government and the Afghans have improved dramatically. Today, we have the level of trust and confidence that we never enjoyed before. So I think we are comfortable, we have confidence, we know in Pakistan that we are their natural allies, we can contribute to them, we share borders, we have a long history, tradition, common culture, religion, traditions, so we should not be sort of overly worried about their relations with India.
Did that conference yesterday do all it could, all it should?
I think the outcome is an achievement. The London conference has given new benchmarks, has given a new direction for the days to come. And I think it has very clearly spelled out that with the military surge, what you require is an equally aggressive civilian surge. And that is, I think, a positive outcome of this conference.
Foreign Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
The other major conference in London this week was, of course, on Yemen. Representatives from all around the world gathered on Wednesday evening to discuss how this beautiful but impoverished country could be kept from collapsing into being a failed state. The meeting was convened by Gordon Brown in response to the attempted Christmas Day bombing of a passenger airline in the US, for which al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, a group in fact based in Yemen, have claimed responsibility. I caught up earlier with Yemen's Foreign Minister, Abu Bakr al-Qirbi, and I began by asking him how he would describe the sort of assistance he hopes to see in the months ahead.
On the economic issue, I think this is the challenge, is how really to attract investment into Yemen. Aid is important, but I think more important is really to attract investments. Yemen has a great potential for investment, whether it is for oil and gas or for the mineral resources in the country, fisheries industry, tourism. Yemen is a touristic country with a long history and tremendous archaeological sites. This unfortunately was not taken benefit of because of the terrorist attacks that has taken place in Yemen over the last probably 2 decades really. I mean, the recent ones are really just the climax, but we've been dealing with terrorism for almost 20 years now in Yemen. The other side, of course, with investment is how donors can come and help Yemen in providing really the assistance for our 5-year development plan. Yemen has a population of 23 million people. 65% of that population, or even a little more, are under the age of 25. About 50% of our population are under 18. So you can see our population growth is about 3.1%.
And to what extent are the militants, the al-Qaeda militants, do they have safe havens where you can't reach them within Yemen?
Well, yes, this is, I think, the challenge, because of the Yemen is in size is larger than Iraq. The terrain is much more difficult than Iraq, with the mountainous areas, with the desert areas, and these are the hideouts for al-Qaeda. Because our counter-terrorism units do not have the proper transport, armored vehicles, helicopters. Even when we attack them by our airplanes, we cannot sometimes get to the sites on the spot in order to investigate and identify who is killed. So that poses for us a problem, yes, for sure.
Would you accept help in the security area, in the form of American personnel, American soldiers, American assistance like that?
Well, we have now a number of trainers from the United States, from Britain, from France, and this is, I think, what we would like to see, is that we want our partners in countering terrorism to help us in building our capabilities, our counterterrorism units. Experience, I'm sure you know, have shown that in Iraq and in Afghanistan and Pakistan, that the presence of foreign troops actually work against the objective of getting the people behind the government in fighting terrorism. And this is why Yemen's position is leave it to us to do the job, but give us the assistance and the know-how to do it.
Give us the tools for the job.
Give us the tools, exactly.
Yes. But foreign troops, however well-intentioned or well-meaning, you think would be counterproductive?
They would be very counterproductive, yes.
Yeah. So that how many Al-Qaeda people are there in operatives and so on do you think in Yemen, and is it more than a year ago?
I think it is very difficult to say how many there are, because they are always in a state of flux, moving around across the borders. But the hardcore, I gave a few hundreds, but I think this is the numbers is not what matters. I think what matters is our ability to deal with them, whatever their number is, because sometimes maybe in countries where there are small numbers, they can do more harm because they are unnoticed compared to places where they are abundant, and they can easily be targeted. So this is what our strategy really is, to address the issue of building the capabilities for Yemen.
And you talked about dwindling resources, where people say that the oil is running out and that the economy is in difficult state at the moment. And some people say that there's a real danger of Yemen becoming a so-called failed state. Do you think there's any fear of that, possibility of that?
I think the possibility is always there if the country is not does not have the resources really to undertake our very ambitious agenda for reforms. We have a national agenda for reforms, which addresses many of the issues that are raised by the World Bank, by the International Monetary Fund, and donors as well. And these, unfortunately, ambitious as they are, the government cannot implement some of them because reforms need also budgets.
Yes.
Whatever we want to do to reform the judiciary, to reform our security forces, to reform our investment laws, wherever you go, educational system, health services, you cannot reform these unless somebody will help you to do that. We get sometimes a lot of advice on how to do things, but unfortunately we are not provided with the means to do it.
Mr. Foreign Secretary, thank you very much indeed for being with us. And
pleasure.
And it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Scotland's greatest export, Billy Connolly, joins me after this break. Welcome back, welcome back. Well, from the shipyards of Glasgow to global megastar, Billy Connolly has been making us laugh and people all around the world for the past 4 decades. Discovered, as it were, after an appearance on Michael Parkinson's chat show here in the UK. Billy has since moved into acting, appearing in films such as Mrs. Brown and The Last Samurai, and now he's gone back to his comic roots here in London, and he's been taking up residence at the Hammersmith Apollo for his latest stand-up show. I spoke to him earlier. Congratulations at another success at the Apollo.
Oh, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah. And you weren't on last night, but you're on again tonight.
That's right. I have 2 nights. I have a Mondays and Thursdays off. Yeah. And I really need them. I find that it didn't happen before, but in recent years I find that if I work every night, I sometimes on stage get the feeling that I'm repeating myself.
What, and you aren't? And
I'm not. I'm just remembering it from the previous night. Yeah. So I find if I have 2 nights off in a week, it stops all that. Yeah. And anyway, I like nights off. Yeah. Do you know what I did last night? No. I went to see The Mousetrap.
Oh, what did you think of it? I saw it about 2 years ago.
You did?
Yes, and I saw it. This is what, been running in London for 50 years.
58 years.
Yeah, and originally, I saw it originally with Richard Attenborough in it.
You saw that?
Yeah, the first year, but I haven't seen it in the last 2 years. So bring us up to date.
It's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
It's like
This is an Agatha Christie, we should say.
Yes, it was like watching early television. It was like when we got television in the 50s. I remember plays were always like that. There was always a body lying around and French windows and.
Yeah.
People wondering who killed the house guest.
That's right.
I loved it.
Oh, it is terrific. What television do you watch for fun?
There's nothing much that I like.
No, nothing much that you like.
Nothing much. I found the more television there is, the less I like. I like Little Britain and stuff like that. I think British comedy on television has got amazingly good, but everything else has turned to sludge.
Sludge, is it?
Yes, I hate reality television. I hate Big Brother. I think it's for dead people to watch. I think it's for people with no life. You know, I hate it. I was watching the television awards the other night, and I was staggered at how banal and crap everything has become.
Yeah. And do you still? You said when you're performing, do you get nervous still before a performance, even after all these years?
Yes, it got worse for a while there, but it seems to have calmed down again. I was getting more and more and more nervous until it got to what you might call an anxiety attack. Yeah, to that kind of level. And now it seems to have come back down again, and I'm really enjoying myself. I don't know what made the difference.
That's fascinating, yeah.
It just, I think my wife kind of talked me out of it, you know.
You were a folk singer, though, before you decided to become a comedian, weren't
Yes.
you? Were you a good folk singer?
No, I was an extremely bad folk singer. I liked playing, I was a decent banjo player. And I liked funny songs and Appalachian folk music and stuff like that. But what I really liked was the whole ambience, the whole hippie, long-haired freedom of it all. Yeah. I didn't want to be a welder anymore. I wanted to be interesting. I wanted to be a gypsy, traveling the road, playing my banjo, meeting interesting women, interesting guys, and getting on with my life. And it happened.
And when were you converted to being a comedian?
It gradually happened. I read it in a newspaper, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought I was a funny folk singer. And it said, comedian Billy Connolly. I had always wanted to be a comedian, but I wasn't sure how you do that. Like, I was too hairy and scruffy for cabaret, and there was no such thing as variety theatre anymore. Yeah. So I just went into the folk music situation, and then went straight from that into concert. So I kind of invented a new wave, a new area to be funny in.
Yeah. And then did you go on writing songs or singing songs, or you just dropped
I did
it?
for a while, and then I got bored with it. Yeah, I got bored carrying the banjo around. You know, the funnier I got just talking and telling stories, the more difficult it became to put music in, to find a place to stop talking and play music, and then having done that, to find a place to stop playing and start talking. I couldn't find a good reason for it, so I just dropped the music altogether. Mm-hmm. And so now, if I want to play, I have friends I like to play music with. Eric Idle, I like to play with Eric Idle, Steve Martin.
And Michael Parkinson had a big part in your career, didn't he?
Enormous, yeah. Yeah, that was extra. I'll never forget it. They offered me the talk show, and I did very, very little television, and I still do very little television. And I had done some little talk shows in Scotland, you know, little local ones. And then I got the offer to do Michael's show. And I got famous that day. It was the day I got famous. I wasn't famous the day before. And I remember I did a show on the Saturday night, and on the Sunday I was flying back to Scotland, and a Chinese guy asked for my autograph at Heathrow. And I thought, what? I did it, and I thought, that's unusual. And then I flew to Glasgow, got off the plane, and everyone in the airport applauded as I walked through. And I was famous.
Yeah.
I wasn't famous the day, but when I walked through the day before, nobody cared.
No.
But they applauded the
One night with Parky, and you were... and that was fame, and that was
That
glory.
was how I got famous, and it hasn't really stopped.
What were the other landmarks in your life? Was the date? When did you meet Pam?
Oh, Pamela, I met. I was a guest. She had a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News, herself and 3 others, and Rowan Atkinson, and I was a guest on it. I was playing the Ayatollah Khomeini in a sketch. She was singing to me, and I was running in slow motion through the smoke, and that's the day we met.
Really?
And we've been together ever since.
The rest is history.
Yes, nearly 30 years ago.
You said in various places, Pamela saved my life.
She did.
How did she do that?
Well, I was drunk, and I was doing various things, various bits and pieces of
recreational chemicals.
Recreational chemical work.
Yeah.
And although thankfully drugs were always too strong for me.
Oh, that was lucky.
I was lucky. I was kind of born high. It took a long time to realise that people were smoking dope to get the way I am normally. You know? and so I would smoke dope, and I would get too high, and it would last too long, and I wish this would go away. It's days, you know. Yeah. And but I liked drinking very much, and I drank far too much, and so she gave me the warning. She said, you know,
it took 5 or 6 years before you gave up completely, didn't it?
Well, I think it took about 3.5, 4, if I remember rightly. I could be wrong. I tried once for several months, and I thought, well, I'm better now. I must be better now. Yeah. So I started again, and 2 days later I was in the same old shape. So I stopped for about 9 months, and I thought, well, I must be better now. And same thing happened again. Yeah. So I stopped for a year. And I thought, well, for goodness sake, if you can come off drink for a year, you must be completely cured. Yeah. It didn't take the day. I was plastered again. Yeah. So that time was in Marbella or somewhere. I was doing a gig for HMV, and I was involved in a fight with somebody, and that I don't remember. I still don't remember the fight until this day. I did the gig in the evening, and they said, that was excellent, and this is for you, and they gave me a big bottle of champagne. And instead of saying, I don't drink, I said, oh, thank you very much. And I was going to just put it away, and I thought, yeah, let's champagne. I mean, it's for sissies, it won't harm me at all. And I don't remember very much after that. And on the plane back, I said to my roadie, Jamie, I said, it's over, that's it, forever. And I haven't touched it since. And that's about 26 years, I think.
Billy Connolly there. There'll be more of Billy Connolly, I'm delighted to say, on our show next week. Right now, I'll be talking, after the break, to NATO's spokesman on Afghanistan and Jordan in just a moment. Welcome back, welcome back. There are currently, of course, 100,000 foreign troops stationed in Afghanistan. The majority of them under the command of the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force. In the coming months, of course, they'll be joined by a surge of a further 30,000 soldiers from the United States. But to find out more, after all that's been going on this week, I'm joined now by NATO's spokesman, James Appathurai. James, the big news this moment, of course, is the thought that we are going to be putting forward £83 million, $140 million, putting it forward in an attempt to try and persuade members of the Taliban to leave the Taliban and join the government forces and so on. More money to come if needed, up to 500 million. Will it work, do you think, James?
The thinking in NATO and in the Afghan government is between 60 to 80% of the people fighting for the Taliban don't do that because they hate the West, because they hate their own government, but for economic reasons. And by giving them an alternative, a farm, some cash, a job, they might have an alternative livelihood compared to what they're doing now. So it is very much a way in which the Afghan government, and they must lead this process, wants to convince a large number of fighters to abide by the Constitution and put down their weapons.
And in terms of the 60 or 80%, of how many? I mean, what's the number of Taliban in Afghanistan, whether susceptible to persuasion or not?
Well, it's a good question. First, it's not just Taliban. There are basically 3 insurgent groups, of which the Taliban is the biggest. There in the south, there's 2 more in the east, which are not Taliban but associated with them. I have seen numbers anywhere from 15 to 35,000. I don't know what the number is, but it is certainly in the low tens of thousands. And if we can peel away half of them, 60% of them, 70% of them, and isolate the ones who simply will not be reconciled, they will have to be dealt with a different way, and they will be dealt with a different way.
And does all of this time, is there any optimism that's justified that this may be successful?
I think there is general optimism growing about what's happening in Afghanistan in 2010, and it has 3 blocks to it. I think one reason for optimism is the surge in troops, which you mentioned in your opening. We now have almost 40,000 soldiers, new soldiers coming in from 39, 40 countries who are flowing into the country, and they are making a big difference starting in the Helmand River Valley just as we're speaking. So that's one reason. Second, because of this reconciliation and reintegration package, it's 2 issues but linked, which we think could offer a real prospect to tens of thousands of people to come and abide by the Constitution. And third, because President Karzai has set out very clear plans to do better when it comes to governance and give the Afghan people reason to support their government. For all these reasons, we think the conditions are in place to make progress. Now we have to actually make progress.
And President Karzai has made something of a comeback in the eyes of the world, I think, yesterday, hasn't he? Because it was so controversial, those elections. But now people seem to be seeing him as the only leader for Afghanistan. Well,
he is the only leader of Afghanistan. He was elected in a process which was certainly not perfect. We understand that. But it resulted in this. He is the head of the government. And in the end, the story of 2010 for us will be transition to Afghan lead in security, but also in civilian areas. And there has to be someone to whom we can transition. So the plans are in place. A lot of money and other support has been pledged here in London at the conference. And we will see this year security responsibility in key provinces or districts go from NATO to the Afghans.
And in terms of the future, that is absolutely key in terms of persuasion and so on, isn't it?
Because we are there not to create Switzerland in Afghanistan. That was never the idea. We are there for our own security, because Afghanistan was and would be again a safe haven and a crucible of international terrorism. It is quite clear. So we need to make sure that Afghanistan no longer poses a threat to itself or to us, that it becomes an inhospitable environment for terrorism. That is when this mission will be successful, and that means we have to help the Afghans be able to secure their own country.
Well, we look forward to having you with us again, James.
Great pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
And now let's hear from the Foreign Minister of Jordan. Nasser Judeh is another person who's in London for the International Conference on Afghanistan, and he's with me now. Nasser, of course, Jordan is very much involved in Afghanistan. We've been hearing about all week about Afghanistan, but I mean, you still have how many people there?
Well, it's not a question of numbers, David. I think the number is just under 1,000. But I think Jordan is there for many purposes. I mean, on the one hand, the humanitarian dimension. We have field hospitals there and the logistical support that's needed for that. And we were one of the first countries many years ago to have participated in this humanitarian effort, and also the collective effort to empower the Afghani people and ensure that their future is promising. And the second dimension, of course, is combating terror. And I know sometimes you hear people saying, well, it's other people's war, why are you there? And let us not forget, and we must not forget, that Jordan was a target of terror and terrorism, particularly most recently the hotel bombings in 2005. And we have said very clearly that we will combat terror wherever it is, particularly that which threatens our country and our citizens. And the third dimension, of course, of our presence there is to defend the true nature and image of Islam against those few who try to distort the image of centrism that Islam projects.
And are your men and maybe women. Are they going to stay? Are you planning to stay in Afghanistan?
We are there for the long haul, and as I said, on the one hand, it's the collective international effort, and on the other, it's to protect Jordan's interest and not Jordan's national security and the security of our people.
Yeah. And how long will the long haul be, do you think, to a satisfactory outcome?
I think people have got to be aware of the cultural and religious sensitivities, and people have got to be able to convince the Afghan people that it is in the long term in their best interest. There was a survey recently, I don't know if you're aware of it, it was an ABC News, BBC News, ARD survey, which showed that over 70% of the Afghan people believe that their future is now promising with this collective international effort that's taking place to help the situation in Afghanistan.
Well, that is a very encouraging statistic and so on. And at the moment, everybody says there's a sort of critical impasse at the moment between Jordan and Israel, that they're not as close as they were, and that the meetings haven't been taking place with the same regularity and so on. Is there a temporary crisis there?
I wouldn't call it a crisis. I think perhaps a serious difference in opinion and approach, and a protest on the part of Jordan for lack of progress on many fronts, including the aspired for relaunch and resumption of negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians and the comprehensive approach to have peace in the Middle East. But we have been saying for a while that the peace between Jordan and Israel is cold and sadly getting colder. For the Jordanian-Israeli peace to make regional sense, just like the Egyptian-Israeli peace before that and the Palestinian-Israeli Accords of Oslo and whatever ensued after that, for all of them to make regional sense, it's got to be a comprehensive peace. And the Arab-Israeli conflict has a core, and that core is the Palestinian issue and the need to establish an independent, viable Palestinian state that lives next door to a safe and secure Israel. So I think this is what we all want. 2009 was a difficult year. We've had difficult years before. This is a 60-year-old conflict, and we're going to have more difficulties, but this should not deter us or affect our resolve.
And in fact, do you think, does the King think that there will be the talks that are needed between Israel and Jordan, or is this impasse with Mr. Netanyahu and the Palestinians going to continue? Because unless there are meetings, it's very difficult to see how there can be progress.
Oh, the meetings happen. We had a meeting between His Majesty the King and Prime Minister Netanyahu back in May, and we were hopeful at the time that perhaps business can be done. Senator Mitchell came on several trips to the region in 2009. He's just embarked on a new trip and concluded it a couple of days ago. We have perhaps an unprecedented situation in that the world is united on the two-state solution. The world is united on the need to have peace in the Middle East. The Arab-Israeli peace, or the Arab-Israeli conflict, I should say, is no longer a conflict that can be described as a local or regional conflict. It's a global conflict, and we are seeing ramifications all around the world, particularly in terms of extremism and extremist ideology. So I think it is important to solve this core conflict. Meetings between Jordan and Israel do take place, but we utilize our peace treaty.
Not currently at the highest level, as it were.
Well, not for a while, but
No.
there were meetings in 2009. I personally have met with several Israeli officials, and as I said, we utilize our peace treaty with Israel to chivvy on in terms of having direct talks between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and in terms of having peace talks in the overall comprehensive sense.
You say Palestinians. What would be the situation? It looks a little way away, but when there is a Palestinian state, will some of the Palestinians in Jordan move to the Palestinian state, or would that swamp the Palestinian state?
Well, one shouldn't prejudge the outcome of negotiations, right. But I think the essence of our approach should be based on the Arab Peace Initiative and international legitimacy and the international terms of reference. The Arab Peace Initiative is very, very simple. It was adopted in 2002 at the Beirut Arab Summit and endorsed by every subsequent Arab Summit and endorsed by the Organization of the Islamic Conference, 57 Arab and Muslim states. The Arab Peace Initiative says also that there should be a just and agreed upon solution to the refugees problem. So negotiations will resolve that issue.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that wide-ranging coverage of the subject. We thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dave.
For being with us.
Thank you.
Nasser Judeh there from Jordan, the Foreign Secretary. And that's it for this week. Do join us again in 7 days from now for another Frost Over the World. Goodbye for now.